Today is June 2nd, 2020. This is the Buddhism 101 group. My name is Alexander Quiros, and we are going to be doing our regular service today. We will have times for meditation, and we'll even do a short, brief teaching, a Dharma talk. For the meditation, we will have two short 10-minute meditations. The first meditation will be just to help center us, bring us more present, and to make us calmer. Hopefully reduce some distraction. Hopefully take our mind off of the chaos that's going on in the world right now and maybe in our lives. The second one will be more to meditate on, to consider and think about the Dharma talk. In the Dharma talk today, we're going to talk about Buddhism and racism, what Buddhism has to say about racism. It is a topic that's very pertinent to what we're seeing right now in the television and our news. And it's a topic that cannot be fully covered in the short Dharma talk today. But what I hope to do is to provide you with some things to think about. Maybe some homework to do at home or during your own meditations as you think about your place in the world right now. So good. I want to welcome Sarai, welcome, and welcome all of you who are watching this in the future. Let's talk a little bit about meditation. So the first meditation will be one that's just to help you get centered, to be more, to quiet down, to be calmer. The techniques that we typically teach for meditation is one that focuses primarily on the breath, and we talk a lot about three different ways of doing that. Hello, Vanessa. It's good to see you. So the first technique is to simply focus on the sensation of breathing. One of the good things about using the breath for meditation, as opposed to using music or instruments or other techniques, is that you carry the breath with you at all times. And so it's possible to do mindfulness meditation anywhere you go, even in the crowded and noisy places. So the first technique is to simply focus on the feeling or the sensations of breathing. And it's interesting, I've mentioned this, that every person seems to notice the breath first at a particular spot. For example, I notice the breath first at the back of my throat. I have a friend who notices the breath the most on her upper lip. Every individual, every person sort of has their own first sensation of the breath. Whatever it is, after noticing that, move on to other sensations associated with the breath. Temperature, any noises, any feelings, expansion of your chest, feelings of the clothes on your skin. Just focus on the sensations that are brought about by breathing. The second technique is to count your breath. You count your breaths up to the number 10, and then once you reach 10, you start over again with 1. And if you lose your place as you're counting, if you get distracted, then you simply start again at the number 1. And the third technique is to use a gatha or a mantra, a phrase or word that is repeated over and over again. One that we often recommend here is breathing in. And so as you breathe in, you say to yourself in your mind, breathing in, I calm my mind. And then as you exhale, in your mind, you say, breathing out, I smile. And you try to hold a half smile on your face. Other things to be mindful of when meditating, when it comes to your eyes, If you look closely at many Buddha statues, the Buddha statues have half closed eyes, and so you half close your eyes and you're kind of looking at a 45-degree down, okay? Or you can close your eyes completely. In terms of posture, because in terms of posture, what you want to do then is try to be in a position that's comfortable enough that you won't get distracted and can stay still for a long period of time, but not so comfortable that you fall asleep. Typically, when you meditate at our temple, we ask that you cross your legs in either a full lotus, half lotus, or just crossing your legs like you used to do in school. But you can meditate lying down, you can meditate sitting, you can meditate standing, walking. So it doesn't have to be sitting. But as you begin your meditation practice, it is helpful to stay with one position for a while until you can establish your practice of meditation, and then you can try and take it elsewhere. Hand position. Typically, the way we do it at the temple is that you put your hands as a bowl with your left hand above your, your right hand above your left hand, okay? And so you sit with that, with your hands on your lap that way. Some people do just what they call mudras, where they'll pinch certain fingers, and you can do that as well. But you want to keep your hands loose, relaxed, so that they don't become a distraction. Good. So that's a few tips on the meditation. Inevitably, even master meditators will get distracted, and that is where the practice of mindfulness comes in. And so when you catch yourself being distracted, when you catch yourself thinking or feeling something other than the focus on the breath, then this is where you refocus your attention, and that is the practice of mindfulness. Mindfulness in general is just another way of thinking of it is self-awareness, or just awareness, just being mindful of what you are doing in the here and now. This can be very good practice during these times, because what we find is that when you focus too much on the future, you tend to cultivate feelings of anxiety. If you focus your attention too much on the past, you tend to cultivate feelings of depression. And so the more you can stay present-oriented in the here and now, the healthier you will feel. After the first meditation, we'll have a short Dharma talk on Buddhism, what Buddhism has to say about racism. Again, I'll repeat what I said earlier for those of you who came a little later after I said this. There's no way I'll be able to discuss every aspect of racism in the 5 to 10 minute Dharma talk. What I hope to do is to challenge your thinking, to maybe give you something else to think about, to maybe reframe racism, to reframe these ideas. And hopefully this will help you gain some insight into yourself and into what's happening in the world around us right now. After the discussion, the Dharma talk, we will then have another 10-minute meditation. And during those 10 minutes, the idea is that you will focus on, sit with the idea or phrase or word that caught your attention the most during the Dharma talk. The idea here being that if that caught your attention, if that caused you some strong emotion, then there's something there for you. Your unconscious mind and emotions are telling you, hey, there's something important here I want to tell you. And so you sit with it, you become curious about that, you explore it, and allow the seed to bloom. Allow the idea to settle. One of the reasons we do meditation is if you become like still water tends to be a lot clearer. And so by quieting the mind, by being still, you allow the sediment of the mind to settle. You cultivate greater clarity, and it becomes easier then to listen to what your unconscious is trying to tell you, what your Buddha nature is trying to tell you. The idea is that we are all Buddhas to be, and the more clarity that we can cultivate, the more we are able to express our own Buddhahood. Good. Take some time now to settle in, get in a comfortable position, and we will begin our first meditation. What I like to do is take a few deep breaths. And as I calm my mind, slip into a meditative state. So, the Dharma talk today will be on Buddhism and racism. And I want to start off by saying that inevitably I will make mistakes in this talk. But given what's going on in the world around us, I felt that being afraid of making mistakes was cowardly, and that we needed to talk. I'm going to start off first by talking about what Buddhism, the ideal, the goal that Buddhism teaches on this topic. Ideally, the ultimate goal is to be able to see that all people and animals and maybe even plants suffer and long to no longer suffer. This ideal calls us to see everyone equally, as equals. The reality is that we are not there. The reality is that just saying that I see no color, or just saying that I don't see race, is not enough. That's not the ultimate goal that Buddhism asks us to try and achieve. Because saying that denies some of the realities around us. We know, for example, we know that people and animals are not treated equally. And there are many different examples of this. So, for example, when you see someone, or when maybe you yourself have insulted someone, the underlying purpose of that is to make that person somehow less than you and make you superior to them. Or vice versa, the person insulting you is trying to make you less than them and themselves superior. So there's an example of how we may treat each other unequally. And we know that there is discrimination around the whole world. It's not just something that is here in the United States. We have seen and we know that there are examples of discrimination in almost every country, probably every country. But why? Why do we do that? Why is that so universal? One theory from evolutionary psychology is that our ancestors needed to very quickly be able to judge whether an individual, a stranger, or an animal was a threat or an ally. And we know from our research that, psychological research, that humans are very good at judging other people within less than 30 seconds. That first impression. And we know that that first impression sticks, and it's a little hard to dislodge sometimes. And that has a genetic component to it. This is how this mechanism helped our ancestors decide who was in the in group, or my tribe, and who was in the out group, or someone else's tribe. And that was important because at that time, resources in our environment was limited. And so we needed to know, or our ancestors needed to know, who was the competition if our ancestors were to survive. But that mechanism is underlying the bias and the racism that we see and the discrimination that we see across the world. So what we're seeing then is a perversion of a primitive mechanism that was once meant to help us survive, and now has become a systemic problem, difficulty, challenge. But like many of these primitive instincts, what Buddhism calls us to do is not to necessarily get rid of them, because some of these instincts we will never get rid of. It's more of managing them, being mindful of them, being mindful of what they do to us, and then responding in a way that is more compassionate, that is wise, and that displays wisdom. Again, there's much more we could talk about, but for the sake of brevity, I want to go now to sort of what are things that Buddhism then would ask us to do? What are things that Buddhism then challenges us to do? Time and time again, we'll see in Buddhism this idea of being mindful of our delusions, being mindful of how sometimes we don't see what's really there, the reality. And we have these thoughts of how it should be, and those sometimes block our ability to see things as they are. So one of the first things to do is to acknowledge that racism, discrimination, and bias exist. If you can't acknowledge that those things exist, there's very little else you're going to be able to do on this list. So that is the first step, is to be able to acknowledge it. But also, and this would probably be the next step, is be aware of, be mindful of the fact that that mechanism is inherent in us, that we've grown up in a society that has given us certain messaging around certain characteristics, and that whether consciously or unconsciously, that bias affects our interactions. Let me give you an example. I once did a study where we looked at, we gave individuals a survey that would help us sort of get an idea of level of discrimination, level of racism. And then we sat the participants in this research in front of a computer. And what the computer did was it paired faces of men of different color with particular words. And long story short, what we found was that everyone that we tested, including myself, which was very surprising, had bias. So here I was, someone who had studied multicultural issues and theories, someone who had been very active with different communities that were not my own communities, and even in myself, I was surprised to find that there was still bias. And that was hard. But I recognized that I needed to accept that first and acknowledge that before I could do something about it. One way we can do this is when we encounter or talk with someone who is not of our group, however you define that, pay attention to what are your first thoughts and your first instincts. Be mindful of what is it that comes up. And would you say or do those things with someone from your own group? So that's a very helpful way of sort of being mindful and aware of our own biases that we all have. And as you start to become more and more aware of what those biases are, you want to help cultivate compassion. Not only for others, but also for yourself. And so it can be very jarring, very difficult to see or to acknowledge that we ourselves have bias and discrimination and maybe some racism. It can be shameful, as it was for me. It could go against the image we have of ourselves, making it easier for us to deny that we are biased. So it's important to have compassion for yourself. Recognize that feelings of shame, feelings of disappointment or anger won't be as helpful as if you were more compassionate towards yourself. Because when you are compassionate towards yourself and others, it is more likely to open up the opportunity for change. If you were here last week, you remember that I said that when intense feelings of anger or shame are activated in our mind, the likelihood of changing one's thoughts or the thoughts of another are almost zero. Anger and shame and many other negative feelings simply do not allow us the freedom to make changes. So compassion is needed for ourselves and for others. That also means, and this is a very challenging part, having compassion for individuals that we may hate. That might be, or have some anger towards. That might be the looters, that might be Antifa, that might be the white supremacists, that might be political leaders, local and federal. What Buddhism challenges to do, and it's so hard, I know, is to understand that those individuals are suffering as well. For example, the looters, those who are looting these businesses, they suffer from the belief that somehow materialism or having stuff will make them happier. They may suffer from feelings of hopelessness. They may believe nothing's going to change. We're still going to have the same racism after all this. And so that feeling of hopelessness may help motivate some of their anger and their frustrations. And it's challenging then to also see that in white supremacists or Antifa or any other political groups or political leaders. But they are suffering. Human. And Buddhism calls us then to be compassionate. And it's more than just words, because Buddha lived this. When we look at the history, not just the teachings, but when we look at the history, we see multiple times when the Buddha himself was confronted by individuals who were angry at him, did not agree with him. There was a time when one of his monks caused a great schism in his monastery, where half of his monks left the Buddha and went with this other monk that created the schism. And through it all, the Buddha continued to show peace, wisdom, enlightenment. He was steadfast with what he believed. And that's what we're challenged to try and do. As difficult as it is, that's what Buddhism challenges to try and do. I want to end here with one other thing. It's a phrase I heard last week, and it stuck with me. I love you. I love myself. I love myself, and I love you. Buddhism challenges us to see ourselves in others and to see others in ourselves. To recognize that loving myself is loving others, and to love others is to love myself. So when you feel you're at a loss, that you don't know what to do, maybe feeling overwhelmed or anxious, frustrated, angry, start first with loving yourself. By taking care of yourself, by showing yourself compassion, you are helping to love others. Whenever you experience an extreme emotion, there is an opportunity for compassion and understanding. There's something there, deep underneath, that strong desire that is causing you suffering. So address that. What is that underlying desire that's causing me suffering? What is that underlying desire that's causing me anxiety, depression, anger, frustration? Is the underlying desire that I wish that none of this was happening right now? Well, the stronger that you hold on to that belief, the more you're going to suffer, because the reality is this is happening. It doesn't mean that you just accept it and just be passive. What it means is that when you're able to see the reality, accept it as reality, be present in the here and now, you will gain more clarity and more wisdom, and you will have better insight as to what to do next. But these intense emotions are neither loving for yourself nor loving for others, and can become an obstacle, and often do. Love yourself and you love others. Love others and you love yourself. Let's take a few minutes now, 10 minutes. Any words or phrases, ideas that were triggered by my Dharma talk, take it with you now into meditation. Sit with it. Be curious about it. Explore it. Find out what are the underlying desires that are creating suffering. Find out what are ways to be compassionate towards yourself and others. Explore what is keeping you from seeing other human beings as suffering human beings. What is keeping you from being loving towards certain others? be any merit cultivated by our interactions here today bring peace and enlightenment to us and to others. It's not easy what we have in front of us. We have a lot of work to do, but it's worth it. Take care. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Real quick announcement. I think next week we will have a Zoom account that we can use. And this should allow us to have more of an interaction as opposed to just having a talking head on your screen. And so we'll change the format a bit next week so that we can allow time for discussion and learning from each other and spending more time with the community. Take care. Goodbye.